Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. This is the post-game podcast. Minnesota Timberwolves defeated the Oklahoma City Thunder in the season opener on Wednesday by 7 points. A game the Wolves led by double figures for most of the first 2.5 quarters or so before a third quarter collapse brought things to the brink. Really, the Wolves were actually trailing in the fourth quarter, but we'll break down all the positives as well. Rudy Gobert, a fantastic Timberwolves debut, a dominant double-double. We'll break it all down here on the show today. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Happy Thursday, everybody. Happy Victory Thursday and happy post-game podcast. A big thank you, first of all, for making Locked On Wolves your first listen each and every day. Of course, you can find this show free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. You can also follow on Twitter at Locked On T Wolves and also at Beecken. That's with two B's, two E's, CKEN. A couple of other quick housekeeping notes. If you missed it last night, had the first live postgame postcast with Marnie Gellner of Bally Sports North. Very excited to have Marnie on the show live after every show this season. Of course, it won't be immediately after the game. Marnie has to do postgame, the studio for Bally Sports North. So it'll be roughly 40 to 45 minutes after the final horn of every game this season. We'll go live. The plan is for every single game, we'll do that. We'll talk 10 minutes or so, 10, 12 minutes following the game. That'll get posted. It's immediately live on YouTube on the Locked On Sports Minnesota YouTube channel. And then it will be posted to all of the audio platforms you listen to Locked On Wolves. So whichever audio platform you're listening to right now, you can find the postcast with Marnie from late Wednesday on that feed as well. With some instant reaction from myself and Marnie. We did have a few audio issues, fair warning, in the first one on Marnie's end, but we are confident we'll get that ironed out, and it's still a great listen. Another note, you can download the Locked On Sports Minnesota Roku app or Amazon Fire TV app. There's an app specific to Locked On Sports Minnesota. You can get Locked On Wolves, Locked On Twins, Locked On Vikings, Wild, Golden Gophers, all your favorite Locked On Minnesota programs are available on the app. You can download the app for free on either Roku or Amazon Fire TV. All right, let's go ahead and get into the game. This is the post-game podcast. After all, I want to go a little more in depth than Marnie and I were able to do on the shorter postcast. Just kind of dig into the key takeaways from this game. If you're new to Locked On Wolves, we'll do this after every game where I'll do a 60-second video on Twitter, and you'll also find that on YouTube. We'll do a 10-minute postcast with Marnie, and then we'll do a full postgame podcast, 25, 30 minutes, that will post overnight, the night/morning following a game, Monday through Friday. So my key takeaway in this one is entirely related to the difference in the Timberwolves offense between the first quarter and the third quarter. And there were a lot of things that didn't go well in that disastrous third quarter. Of course, the Wolves ended up winning this game by 7, but they were up 13 at halftime. And then the Oklahoma City Thunder went on a 14-0 run. It was a 19-2 run. Then I think it was a 25-5 run over the course of the third quarter, and actually took a 6-point lead before the Wolves got a quick 4 from Jaden McDaniels, and then a steal and a buzzer-beating runner from like 22 feet from Rudy Gobert to close the third quarter tied. But they were down by 6 in the third quarter in this one. And we talked a lot about the Wolves offense throughout the preseason. My key takeaway from like 3 or 4 of the 5 preseason games was, hey, the Wolves offense is going to be a ton of fun this year. We saw that in the first quarter. Karl-Anthony Towns had, how many assists did he have? 5 assists in the first quarter alone, finished with, I believe, 7 assists on the night. And it wasn't only Cat either. Early in the game, yes, it was 7 total for the game for Cat in the assist column. But the first quarter offense was unbelievably creative. There was tons of cross-screen action and just kind of fast backside pick and rolls or fast backside actions out of pick and rolls on the strong side. Just like lots of things going on that were springing. Towns was getting the ball in the perimeter. They're getting him in the mid post, but he wasn't really looking to shoot. He forced up one shot early, and then he was in like ultra pass mode. And you could see this with Karl-Anthony Towns sometimes. Actually, Marnie mentioned this on the postcast where he kind of makes up his mind and he's like, here's what I'm going to do. He was going to pass in the first quarter. But in past years, oftentimes that meant it was a behind the head, cross court, weird looking, like wraparound pass that flew out of bounds into the third row or was stolen easily, easy bucket the other way for the opposition. That wasn't the case in the first quarter of this game. Karl-Anthony Towns was on time, on target, intelligent, precise passing. He had a couple of alley-oop lob passes to Rudy Gobert. One nice kind of wraparound type pass in traffic. Actually the first bucket of the game for the Wolves, he led Rudy through traffic with just a perfect pass. It was incredible. And we know Towns can pass the ball like that. It's when he gets overzealous and tries to do more than he should. And while the Wolves were kind of forcing the ball into Rudy, it wasn't in a bad way. Like it worked. Rudy had what did he have? Like, I think 6 field goal attempts in the first quarter. At halftime, Rudy Gobert had 9 field goal attempts. Karl-Anthony Towns only had 2. And it was not a bad thing. It was a function of the Wolves trying to get Rudy involved. The Thunder also having just a very diminutive front court. Kenrich Williams was playing center for a good chunk of this game. And that's not, he's not a center, right? I mean, he's essentially a small forward. The Thunder are embarrassingly undersized, and Mike Muscala plays on the perimeter. He's close to 7 feet. Alexei Pokusevski is 7'2", but he plays like a guard. Obviously, no Chet Holmgren. There's no size to this team, and so it made sense for the Wolves to pound the ball inside. And Rudy got his touches. The offense was flowing in the first half. D'Lo even got some shots up. It was just kind of like a free-flowing, exactly what you'd expect. The creativity of Chris Finch was on full display, and the offensive talent of this team was on full display. But then fast forward to the third quarter, and it was the exact opposite. It was very, very almost kind of eerily similar to what we saw at times last year, which is that this offense can just devolve into like, hey, I'm Ant or I'm D'Lo, and I'm going to stand on the perimeter. I'm going to pound the ball into the floor for 12 seconds, and then I'm going to, a late clock pick and roll is going to happen with, 6 seconds on the clock. And then I'm going to force up a tough mid-range, or I'm going to try and get inside and then run into, we saw a couple of these where Rudy'd set a screen for Ant, and then Ant would drive right into Rudy's roll. And it just doesn't make any sense. That happened a little bit later in the game. The third quarter was just more stagnant offense. It was like, hey, get into the pick and roll early in the clock. If you're going to run a pick and roll, do it early, so you have time to screen and rescreen. So you have time to have a secondary action. So you have time to, find a cutter along the baseline instead of this late clock 4-shot stuff. And we saw a lot of that in the third quarter. And that's how the Wolves gave up a 19-2 run and ultimately were trailing by 6. Then in the fourth quarter, the Thunder kind of repaid the Wolves by doing what I think we all expected the Thunder to do, which is get real sloppy with the ball themselves, get a little too shot happy. First opportunity to get up a shot. The Thunder were doing that, and they were missing all the shots they made in the third quarter. In no world, on no planet, should the Wolves give up 35 points in a quarter to the Oklahoma City Thunder. That happened in the third quarter of this game. It was not great. However, other than that quarter, the Wolves defense was actually quite good. And the bigger takeaway for me is how the Jekyll-and-Hyde of this offense, and any NBA team can do this. Like, it's not, the Wolves aren't the only team, and not by any stretch, but it's just incredible to see just how high level this offense could be in the first quarter. And frankly, like, it was still sloppy. There were some bad turnovers. D'Angelo Russell with the inbound turnover, stepping on the base, on the end line. There were a couple other just real ugly. There was a backcourt turnover at one point that was sloppy. And yet they put up 35 in the first quarter, and it looked relatively easy. They got what they wanted in the paint with Gobert. And then in the third quarter, it was the exact opposite. In fact, I actually didn't notice this until right now. The scores in the first and third quarter were exactly flipped. The Wolves outscored the Thunder 35-22 in the first quarter. The Thunder outscored the Wolves by the same score, 35-22 in the third quarter. 35-22 Wolves in the first quarter, 35-22 Thunder in the third quarter. Crazy. They were exactly inverted. And it felt like that too. I mean, that was how dominant each of those teams were in those respective quarters. The second quarter, by the way, was a tie, 30 points apiece. And the fourth was ugly, but the Wolves were able to pull away late in the end. They didn't really pull away. It came down to the final minute, really the final 30 seconds. The final score of 7, the margin of 7, is not indicative of how close this game was down the stretch. By the way, if you didn't watch the game, the Wolves got a meaningless dunk for McDaniels with 0.4 seconds left. But missed a couple of free throws down the stretch. The Thunder were really still in it until the final 30 seconds. So The Jekyll and Hyde of this offense will be something to absolutely keep an eye on here as we move through the season. I've got a couple other big takeaways I want to touch on before I get into the individual studs and duds from this game. First, though, let's talk about our friends over at BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for betting football and at the start of the new basketball season. Of course, that just got underway this week. And also now baseball playoffs too. There's plenty to bet on over at BetOnline. You can find all the latest player developments, team matchups, news, podcasts, and in-depth analysis on every game. Plenty of basketball. Of course, the national games Thursday night are fun. Both basketball and football actually are fun to bet on when there's only a couple games going on. It feels like you got to get in on the action. Thursday is a good night for that. You know, usually the featured two, sometimes there's 3 or 4 total NBA games on Thursday, and then one NFL game, a big weekend of football as well to get involved on BetOnline. As always, BetOnline remains your continued source for all your sports wagering information with live betting and up-to-the-minute scores for every sport out there. The fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite games and events, including the MLB playoffs. NHL now has started MMA, boxing, and golf. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. A big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen today. Now make your second listen the Game to Game NBA podcast. Every moment, every top performance, and every result. Locked On Game to Game covers every game from across the NBA with local analysis that only Locked On can deliver. Follow Game to Game on Locked On NBA, available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Okay, additional takeaways for me. The rebounding disparity. The Wolves are actually a -2 on the glass in this game. It was 57-55. I talked about this on Wednesday's show when I did the preview for Wolves Thunder. Over the course of 4 games last season, the Wolves never were out-rebounded by the Thunder. And remember, the Timberwolves were one of the league's worst defensive rebounding teams. They were dead last for much of the season, finished, I think, 28th maybe in defensive rebounding, certainly in the bottom 3. And yet the Thunder never out-rebounded the Wolves last season because they were small. They were pretty much dominated across 4 games by the Wolves. Yet in this game, the Oklahoma City Thunder were a +2 on the glass and pulled down, 14 offensive rebounds? I had it 16 offensive rebounds in this game. The Thunder pulled down. Now, a little bit of it was fluky. There was like back-to-back possessions in the third quarter where it was like third quarter, where there were just like long rebounds that bounced over both Gobert and Towns. Like just things like that happen, right? But in general, it should not have been this close. I mean, the Wolves have by far the 2 biggest players on the floor and really kind of the 3 biggest players. Jaden McDaniels is lankier and bigger than everyone except for Pokasevsky on the Thunder. It was just really disappointing the way that the Wolves ended up rebounding the basketball. And the crazy thing is Anthony Edwards had 8 rebounds. He was actually the Timberwolves' second leading rebounder next to Gobert's 16, which you don't get a lot from Anthony Edwards. I mean, he's not. That's the biggest knock on his game, in my opinion, is, not defensively, not off the ball, even defensively, it's rebounding. A guy as big and strong and athletic and young and bouncy as Anthony Edwards should be getting 6, 7 boards a game. And thankfully he got 8 in this one. But in general, the Wolves struggled to rebound the basketball. And it was a bit surprising. And I said this on the postcast with Marnie. I do think that there was a little bit of flukiness there because some of the long rebounds, some of the bad misses by the Thunder, I think over the course of the 4 matchups with the Thunder, and they play them again on Sunday in Oklahoma City, I don't think that the Wolves will have too many issues rebounding the ball against this particular Thunder team. But it was just kind of a weird thing that happened in this one. Another interesting note was related to the rotation. And this is always fun to kind of dissect, one game into the season, and then we see how this kind of shifts over the next few games. Because, I mean, go back and look at the rotation game 1 last season. It was very different than game 10, very different. Remember, Jared Vanderbilt wasn't even really in the rotation the first 2 or 3 games. And then the Wolves rolled, I think it was game 3, he came out to guard Giannis. I think he even started maybe in Milwaukee. And then he was just like a staple in the starting lineup, by Thanksgiving, or actually even earlier than that last year. So who knows what this rotation looks like in a week, 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks. But in this one, the Chris Finch staggered Karl-Anthony Towns to Rudy Gobert, just like he suggested that he would do. Every single moment to this game, all 48 minutes, at least one of the Timberwolves' 2 bigs were on the floor, at least one of Rudy or Towns. Gobert was the first one to hit the bench. He came out with about 5 minutes left in the first quarter, sat for 3.5 minutes, and then Towns came out. Gobert came back in to finish the first, and then Towns didn't come back in until about the 7-minute mark in the second quarter. He came in for Rudy. Rudy sat for about 4 minutes, came back in together, so they played the final 3.5 minutes of the first half with Karl-Anthony Towns and Rudy Gobert on the floor together. In the first half, Cap played 17 minutes, Rudy played 16 for the game. Cap played 36 and Rudy played 34. So that feels like a pretty typical split. Ideally, you're winning these games, most of these games against, teams that are on Wembanyama watch, which we'll say that charitably about many of these teams. I mean, that's about right. You'd like maybe Cat to only have to play 32 and Rudy to play 30. But I mean, that's probably going to be about what we see from this staggered rotation. That meant Naz Reid didn't play at all. The preseason darling Naz Reid saw the floor for 0 minutes. And I said this for much of the preseason. Now, again, this could change in the next week very easily. I said basically all offseason, I thought Naz Reid was going to be the 11th man, maybe 10th man, depending on matchups, could see a few minutes here and there. Well, in this game, that was Bryn Forbes. Bryn Forbes played 4 minutes. He was kind of a fringe member of the rotation. Austin Rivers played the situational minutes. He ended up according to the ESPN box score, he played 1 minute, but he entered the game, I think 3 different times, essentially for one play each time. So 1 to 2 minutes is what Austin Rivers played. So ultimately 11 guys played, but Naz Reid didn't see the floor. And I thought that was interesting. It wasn't a shock to me. I think it's going to be very dependent on matchups. And in this game, it just wasn't necessary. Both Cat and Rudy managed to stay out of foul trouble for the most part. It was really only Anthony Edwards that was in serious foul trouble. And I guess late D'Lo picked up a 5th foul, but there wasn't big man foul trouble for Minnesota in this game. So I thought that was really interesting. Beyond that, rotation wise, we saw extended minutes for Jaylen Nowell at point guard, especially in the second half. No Bryn Forbes in the second half. His 4 minutes were all first half. And again, situational Austin Rivers minutes. I think the Noel thing's really interesting. I started to kind of shy away from this, but early in the lead into the season, I thought there was a chance Jaylen Nowell could play some pretty heavy backup point guard minutes. We ultimately saw that in this game when the Wolves offense stagnated in the third quarter. Finch tried pushing the Jaylen Nowell instant offense button. It didn't work like it did in the first half. Jaylen Nowell had 8 quick points in the first quarter, like in 3 minutes at the end of the first quarter. And then he got a bit, he's always shot happy, but the shots didn't fall as much early in the second. He got pulled, came back in the third when the Wolves needed offense. It didn't click quite the way that Finch wanted it to. So Jordan McLaughlin came back in to initiate offense to try and calm things down. He had a bad turnover. That stint didn't work well for McLaughlin. So Finch was just really searching in the mid-late third quarter, early fourth quarter. And Noel had the opportunity to run some offense, and it was pretty much a mixed bag. Like if you look at the box score for this game, you'd say, oh, Jaylen had 13 points and 11 shots in 18 minutes. Not bad. But really much of that damage was done when he was like 4 of 5 shooting in 3 minutes at the end of the first quarter. And the rest of his performance wasn't all that great. I just thought it was notable that he ended up with 18 minutes. Jordan McLaughlin played 11. Chris Finch was more than happy to give it a shot with Jaylen Nowell running the point. And, again, a mixed bag there for sure. Taurean Prince, we'll talk more about him next segment. Spoiler for Studs and Duds, but he only played 12 minutes and was phenomenal, especially in the first half. So we'll talk more about him as well. But Kyle Anderson, quiet night. He's not going to make the Duds list. I guess another spoiler for next segment, but because he just didn't do much. But a quiet night for him. I think we can expect more out of him moving forward. So interesting to watch this rotation evolve. Again, very matchup dependent. I'm sure Naz Reid will see some minutes here moving forward. But absolutely something to keep an eye on. All right, let's close the game with individual studs and duds, as we always do on the post-game podcast. All right, individual studs and duds. I've got under studs for this game. Rudy Gobert absolutely gets a stud award. 23 points, 16 rebounds in his Timberwolves debut. Shot 67% from the field, 10 of 15, 3 of 5 at the line, a couple of assists, 1 steal, 1 block. He altered probably another dozen shots, honestly. And there were multiple loose balls that he just got a fingertip on and kept alive. He had a volleyball put back at one point, like over his head. He had 7 offensive rebounds, but he was under the basket, like reached up and volleyball tapped it behind his head, kind of almost like I guess in volleyball, this would probably be illegal, wouldn't it? But it was like a set shot, but backwards, which it doesn't matter. But I feel like that you can't do that in volleyball. But either way, it was like a volleyball type play where he tipped it over his head and in. Had a couple other type, it was almost like Kevin Love-ish, but with a lot more length with Rudy Gobert, with the way he was kind of volleyballing around on offense, on the offensive glass. Fun to watch Rudy do that. He had a couple possessions where he forced things and he missed a couple layups early in the game, and yet he ended up 10 of 15. It's just insane. Over the course of the game, he's going to shoot 65, 70% every night. We've seen that the last several years for Rudy. But he was fantastic. Just alters the game in so many ways. And Wolves fans have only seen it, 3-4 times a year when the Wolves have played the Jazz in the past. But man, when he's on the floor, there's just so many more easy buckets available on putbacks. There's so many more easy, kind of possession ending plays, not easy plays, but possession ending plays that he can just kind of randomly make for you to save a possession here and there on the defensive end of the floor. And he was fantastic in this one. Really excited to see what this thing looks like. The chemistry between Gobert and Cat is I would say burgeoning. Like it's exciting to watch this thing blossom. And now we're just 1 game in, 2 games if you include the only preseason game they played together, but a lot of fun. Another stud for me in this game, Jaden McDaniels. Haven't talked about him yet. You could argue that he had every bit as big of an impact on this game as Rudy Gobert. 19 points, 6 rebounds, 3 assists, 3 steals, and 2 blocks for Jaden McDaniels. Have a box score line, Jaden McDaniels. That's fantastic. 19-6, 3-3-2. He was a team high plus 14 in the plus minus column. 5 of 10 shooting, 9 of 10 at the line. He played 36 minutes, was really good defensively. He was 0 of 3 outside the arc. That was the only issue with his game. He was 5 of 7 on 2-point attempts. I think there was only 1 ill-advised shot that he took. He was overall picked his spots beautifully, was effective on defense, had a couple really nice blocks, only 1 turnover in this game. Just a fantastic all-around game from Jaden McDaniels. And if you've listened to the show in the past, I'm a relatively harsh critic of Jaden McDaniels because I think the idea of his defense has been oversold at times versus what he's actually done. And certainly on offense, that's been the case. But if he plays like this every night, obviously it would be incredible if he averaged 19 and 6. But if he does a lot of the things he did in this game with the same relative efficiency, knocks down maybe 1 corner 3 a game, grabs a couple of steals a game, and is just as active as he was. I think it was the activity and the confidence level that he appeared to be playing with was huge. And if he could do that night in and night out, man, talk about a crazy starting 5 that the Timberwolves would have. But just a really fun performance from Jaden McDaniels, and I wanted to make sure to underscore that. My third stud for this one is Taurean Prince. He only played 12 minutes, but his first half stint was like the absolute perfect role player stint. I tweeted out like, hey, Taurean Prince is having a perfect role player stint. That was after he'd hit like a pump fake 3, 1 hard dribble in, knocks down a mid-range jumper. Next possession or a couple of possessions later, he knocks down a corner 3. I think he had taken 1 charge at that point. And then in the next 3 game minutes, he took another charge. He dished a beautiful assist and then hit another 3. And I had tweeted out how fantastic his stint was when he was like only halfway through doing all of the awesome things he did. His stat line's crazy. 11 points on 4 of 5 shooting. He was actually 4 of 4 at halftime and 3 of 3 outside the arc. He missed his only shot in the second half. 11 points, 3 rebounds, and an assist in 12 minutes. And the second half stint again wasn't as good, but that wasn't at all his fault. But a fantastic first half stint. He took 2 charges total on the night. He grabbed those 3 boards. He knocked down 3 threes. And I'll say this is a topic probably for another show. But remember how bad Taurean Prince was early last year? He was shooting like 20% from 3 at Christmas time. And it was on track to be a career low for him. And then from like mid-January on, he was lights out. He was like 45%. I don't know the exact number, but it was something close to 50% from 3. And the Wolves, of course, picked it up as a team. They were below 500 in December at one point, I think even into early January. And I'm not at all saying that like the team goes how Taurean Prince goes, but that's kind of how it was last year. Was like Taurean Prince was bad and the Wolves were underperforming, and then all of a sudden the law of averages kicked in and Taurean got comfortable and he saw more consistent minutes and his numbers went way up and the Timberwolves played much better down the stretch last season. So I think there's on some level of correlation because, like, obviously if your bench players play better, your role players play better, you're going to win more games. I don't think it's one of those like, oh, when Taurean Prince scores 10 or more points, the Wolves have this record, because I think those stats are kind of overblown. But there's something to be said for role players who know their role, can execute their role, and do a fantastic job. And he was the Wolves' best bench player in this one easily. So good game for Taurean Prince. Only one dud today. That's a tough one. It's Anthony Edwards. He actually, if you just look at like this part of his box score, 11 points, 8 rebounds, 7 assists. Sounds nice, right? But he shot 4 of 17, 1 of 7 on threes, only 2 of 4 at the line. So he only got 4 free throw attempts on 17 field goal attempts, and then only made half his free throws when he got to the line. The defense was spotty. He left, he allowed penetration, lost contain on the perimeter a couple of times where he just kind of let his guy get past him. Not a great game for me. I know he had the 7 assists and the 8 rebounds, both fantastic numbers, but the defense overall wasn't great. The offensive shot selection wasn't great. The execution wasn't great. He kind of dribbled to nowhere a couple of times. There were a couple of possessions where, you know, you look at the person you're watching the game with and go, he better not shoot a pull-up jumper here from 18 feet. And he does it and he misses it. And like, it was just one of those games for Ant. And we saw a ton of that over the course of the preseason. We've seen these ruts for him before. Hopefully this is only a 1-game regular season rut and he pulls right back out of it this weekend. But not a great game from Ant. And yet at the same time, like, I'm calling it how I see it. Like, that wasn't a good game. But like, think about it this way. I said this on the postcast with Marnie that, I mean, Ant and Cat combined to shoot 6 of 26 for the game. And yet the Wolves won by 7. They were combined 3 of 14 outside the arc. And the Wolves won by 7. Jaden McDaniels was great. Rudy Gobert was great. Haven't talked about D'Lo. He was solid. 20 points, 5 rebounds, 2 assists. He did have 4 turnovers, but a decent game for D'Lo. He hit a couple of really tough shots when the Wolves needed him to in the second half. But really, this was, you know, a Rudy game and a Jaden McDaniels game and some nice bench minutes from Prince and Noel. And the Wolves held on to beat an inferior team, and that's what you have to do. I mean, we'll see what happens, you know, next time around. The Wolves take on the Jazz at home on Friday. The Jazz had a, I don't know. I mean, like, I didn't watch it, but they had a stirring 21-point win over the Denver Nuggets. I mean, like, in what world did anyone expect the Jazz to beat the Nuggets? It sounds like there was some Malik Beasley revenge going on. So who knows if we'll see some of that on Friday against the Wolves. But the Jazz come to Minnesota. Jared Vanderbilt, Malik Beasley make their return to Target Center. That's a 7 p.m. Central tip. We'll preview that game on Friday's show, as well as some other topics. That'll be the last full show of the week. We'll do the live postcast Friday evening with Marnie again, though. A big thank you to those of you that do make Locked On Wolves your first listen each and every day. And of course, a reminder that you can follow and subscribe to this show wherever you listen to podcasts. That includes YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. That also includes the brand new Locked On Sports Minnesota Roku app and the Amazon Fire TV app. Download the Locked On Sports Minnesota app for free. You'll get 24/7 local sports coverage, Locked On Wolves, and all your other Locked On Minnesota sports podcasts. Again, Locked On Sports Minnesota app, Roku, Amazon Fire TV. Please go check it out. You can also, of course, follow the show on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken. Again, those live postcasts with Marnie can be found on the Locked On Sports Minnesota YouTube channel, so go subscribe to that. And would love to have you follow along live Friday evening following Wolves Jazz. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. You can make your second listen Locked On NBA. The NBA season is upon us, and our local NBA experts and insiders have you covered on and off the court all season long. All the biggest stories around the NBA every Monday through Friday in less than 30 minutes. Available on YouTube, Odyssey, and wherever you get podcasts. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.